Welcome to Kings of Kimuras, your one-stop podcast for everything from mats to the stars. Join us as we dive into the heart of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, explore the thrills of MMA, and groove to the beats of music. But that's not all. We're also venturing into the unknown, discussing aliens and the mysteries of the cosmos. And of course, we'll be shooting the breeze, sharing stories, and laughs along the way. Get ready for a wild ride from a universe of topics. Strap in and prepare to explore the world of BJJ, MMA, music, aliens, and more. Let's roll.
All right, guys, welcome to another Kings of Kimura podcast. This is an episode where we don't have Dom. He's out doing something. But Jed has stepped in, and something, you know, the crazy thing about running a podcast is like there's always one little thing that happens that screws up that we have to go back and redo. And we just had an amazing conversation. We'll try to pick it up. I'll summarize a little bit. Jed was a Marine, went in 99. Got out in when?
May of 2006.
And he spent some time in Iraq. So I was asking him a question about, did you see any of these like information or tablets or something that Saddam had? Because I've just heard there was rumors, even recently a guy was on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about this, that Saddam was one of these guys that was kind of like researching a lot of the same stuff that the Nazis were researching, right? And he was like looking for some type of ancient technology. I don't know any more than that, really. And sure. So you were giving your speech about your first time in there was where at?
Yeah, so my second deployment, but my first one to the Middle East was in Mosul, which is in the north of Iraq, which now I know is the modern name for Nineveh, which, you know, in the Old Testament it's famous with the story of Jonah, and God wants him to go preach to the Ninevites, and he doesn't want to, and, you know, God creates a fish and swallows him, drops him off the shores of Nineveh. Apparently that's Mosul, which I didn't know at the time. It would have made it a lot more cool. I just thought this place was Mosul, and of course we were busy doing other things. And then my second one was more around, which was 0506. That was Baghdad, Fallujah, Ramadi area. Okay. And Baghdad's the modern name for Babylon, which is, you know, also all these Old Testament stories and the tablets and stuff like that. So while I was there, I wasn't thinking about it, but, you know, looking back, like, I'm sure, I mean, those places are so, I mean, literally the birthplace of civilization. You know, the people have been there since there have been people. And so I'm sure there's something to it.
There was a guy that was, he's been on Joe Rogan's, and he's like tied in with Graham Hancock, and all those guys are like, you know, historians. And he was, I don't know if he was in the Army or he was in the Marines, but he was actually sent to an area where it was like the supposed entrance to like Mesopotamia. And there's like an arch that has since been destroyed by, I don't know if it was destroyed by like Iraq but it was destroyed by somebody in that area. You know, that was like an opposed to whatever regime was there. But they actually were able to like 3D print this in another area, but it's like a giant horse with a guy on top of it. And it's really cool looking if you ever get a chance to look at it. But, you know, that is like an ancient area, man. You start like understanding about Sumeria and stuff, and like these ancient kings that were like richer than any person has ever seen, even today, you know, but people don't, you know, it's so long ago, like most people don't even know about it. You'd have to pick up a book to like learn, you know. I think that stuff's pretty interesting. But then like being in that country, you know, under those circumstances is like completely different than like going there. It's like a research venture, you know. Yeah, it's, you're not there to sightsee or like stop and look at the historical markers, you know?
But it was cool, like, you know, okay, on this mission we're going to go from here to here and accomplish this thing, and this river we're crossing is going to be the Euphrates. And it's like, yo, the Euphrates, like you read about that in all the old books, and then, oh, this one we're crossing the Tigris, and like, yo, you know, because in the Old Testament it talks about, you know, where the Garden of Eden was, you know, amongst those rivers. And so you're like, yo, I'm in this place now. Like, it's just, it's a trip.
You think of like how much has changed since then, you know. I mean, I've heard that area used to be like a super fertile land, you know, and now it's obviously like majority desert. But I guess there is some areas that are like, you know, they grow a lot of their own food.
There's
and stuff,
some
right?
spots there that you're like, okay, I could see how this could be the Garden of Eden. Like, it's lush, and there's a river on each side, and there's green. I mean, it's more like a jungle than a desert. And then, you know, 6 hours later, a sandstorm will blow in, and you're like, okay, we're still in the desert. But yeah, there's definitely some lush areas. And it's, you know, us being in Texas, especially being in the Dallas area, you know, we all have kind of an in-house rivalry with, you know, San Antonio or Houston, other Texas cities. You know, Houston's famous for having no zoning. You could have, you know, a mansion here, then a shack here, and then a business here. And Iraq is like that. Like, you have a palace, and right next to the palace is like some dude slaughtering sheep right on the street, and then next to that is just a normal house. It's just like, and then it's desert, and then it's lush. It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I don't have any experience in the Middle East. Like, anything that I've ever known about it has been either watched on video or read in a book. You know, but I forget what the book was that I read, but it talked about like Ramadi and stuff, and like how crazy of a undertaking that was. Of like, basically every day you go in, it's like just as bad as it was the day before, you know, or maybe like a new area is worse than it was the day before.
Yeah, that was so in March '03 when, you know, we were first in. It was hectic, and there was a lot going on, but then once we started pushing into the city, not all, 'cause some of the people didn't want us there, but a lot of the people, you felt kind of like how the World War II guys, like you felt like you were a liberator.
Yeah.
And that was kind of cool. Like, people would be cheering and saying nice things about America, and, you know, kids, of course, always asking for candy and stuff. But then, you know, so that deployment ends, come back to the States for a bit, go back to Iraq, you know, just a year and a half later, in August '05. And it was in the first time was way up north of Mosul. The second time was more in the Baghdad, Fallujah, Ramadi area. And it was a whole lot more chaotic. And it seemed like nobody liked us at that point. Because at that point, we were, you know, invaders and occupiers instead of liberators, kind of the feeling I got from the populace. Ramadi it was like you were saying, it seemed like every day was worse than the next. It was going off at that time.
Yeah, I wish I could remember what the name of that book was, man, but it like really well described like firsthand accounts of like stuff that went on there. And it was like, you know, pushing in on different houses every single day, and like, you know, taking leads of like what you could get. But like you said, nobody wanted you there, right?
Yes.
Even if you were like coming to clean the bad guys out, the people were like, leave, I don't want you here anymore, right?
It was, we weren't welcome at that point.
Were you training any like martial arts then, like jujitsu, or like was that?
Kind of. So when I went in, at least I know when I was young, used to hear these. Of course, we're the same age. So when we were younger, it was pre-UFC days. It was pre-everything. No one really knew, you know, who would win in this. It was all like a mental game. And you'd hear, or at least I would hear these stories. Hey, you never want to fight a Marine because they're brainwashed. And like back then, like you never wanted to fight the kung fu guy because he had the death touch and all this. And I was wondering what that was about. Like, and so when I went to boot camp, we were still getting trained. The hand-to-hand system was called line training. It was like everything in military is an acronym. It's linear integration of neural something is what the line stood for. And I was like, oh, this is where the myth or the legend of Marines being brainwashed and why you don't want to fight them. Because it's kind of like, all right, if this situation happens, do bop, 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 bop. And so that's what I learned in boot camp. And then couple years after that, the Marine Corps switched from that, which they'd done for decades, to what they called McMAP, the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And so it's basically the new Marine Corps military combatives. And so I was blessed to be selected to go through that training program when it first came out. And so they got a belt system, much like jiu-jitsu. It goes tan, gray, green, brown, black. And so I went through the first instructor course they had at the base I was on, became a green belt instructor, and then later on became a brown belt instructor. So there's a little bit of jiu-jitsu in that, not a lot.
Is it like a Krav Maga type of?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of boxing, there's a little bit of judo, there's a little bit of jiu-jitsu, there's a little bit of Muay Thai, but they'll take like, and then there's, you know, they get a lot of the Filipino stuff because you're fighting with weapons of opportunity, whether it's a stick or a knife. And so there's a little bit of everything, and it's a decent, well-rounded system that you could teach someone that knows nothing and get them to at least some competency and some confidence quickly.
Yeah.
But like, you know, as far like you don't, if we're picking one specific aspect, if we're picking the jiu-jitsu aspect, you're not even close to a blue belt level of competency in jiu-jitsu, but you're learning. But the flip side is you might learn a move doing that you wouldn't learn in a regular jiu-jitsu course till you're a brown belt or a black belt, because they're like, hey, this specific thing will work and you drill this thing.
Yeah.
But how to get the setups and how to pass the guard to get to that thing to actually apply it isn't really taught, you know?
Yeah. So there's like it seems like they teach a lot of like moves, but no like concepts of like chaining stuff sometimes, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, I saw the video sometime back. I think it was, I don't know if it was on UFC Fight Pass or on YouTube itself. They had some pretty high level UFC guys that went to I think it was Camp Lejeune, one of the Marine Corps bases, and they trained with some of those guys. And obviously the UFC guys, if you put them in an octagon, would just house the McMap guys. But since it was so specific to what they were doing, and it wasn't something the UFC guys were used to, the Marine Corps martial arts program guys did well in their field. So you got to keep in mind too, like, you know, the primary weapon system is going to be if it's artillery or your rifle, and you're going to fall back from that to your pistol.
Yeah.
And pistol you almost never use as, you know, last reserve type of thing, 'cause it's such a close weapon. If that fails, you go to your knife, and then if that fails, you're going hand to hand. Yeah. So in the tier of usefulness in the Marine Corps, the hand-to-hand isn't super useful in applying to the mission, but it's good training. It's good for the mindset. You know, as you know, with jiu-jitsu or any other combat sport, it's great to know that if something popped off in a bar or the grocery store, you can do more than the normal guy. But one of the better aspects is just what you get day in, day out, like the mental exercise after you roll, and how much calmer you are once you leave, you know, than when you came in. And so it's a good program, but as with any program, that could, you know, there's some deficiencies in it.
Yeah. I wonder if like with those UFC guys, obviously the Marines like pick the top level guys too, right? It's not like
I'm sure it's all the best Marine Corps instructors. Yeah.
I wonder like if those instructors are like actually learning other stuff and allowed to apply other techniques, or is it like only these techniques are ones you should teach and train?
That's a good question, and it's almost 20 years since I've been in, and the Marine Corps changes fast, so I wouldn't be able to answer today. But I knew back then the guy that one of the handful of guys that crafted this new program. You know, I think he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which was in 2000. Like that was hard to come by.
Yeah.
And he was in that, and then some of the other guys did some more of the traditional martial arts, and some of them did Krav Maga and said, hey, let's take a little bit of this. So I know those guys were doing outside training as well. And I'm sure with the rise of the popularity of jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts, that the new crop of Marines that are in there, not only doing that, but applying what they see on YouTube, and probably also going out in town to a jiu-jitsu school or a boxing gym and training that too. Yeah.
You know, my grandfather was in the Marine Corps. I don't know if I ever told you that story, but he was in like prior to Korea. Like that's the era. So it like came time for him to renew. And I think when he was in, he didn't like see any action, but he was like in a tank battalion, or I'm not sure if that's the right word, but that's what he was part of. And so it was like a Friday afternoon, and he had to drive to the next city over, which was like a good 45-minute drive, to re-enlist. Obviously, this is like pre-internet, you know, it's like nothing you're signing digitally. And he gets there, and his assistant is like, oh, well, the recruiter is at lunch, so come back here in 30 minutes, he'll be back. Okay, so he goes and eats, comes back, and she says, well, he's gone golfing for the afternoon, like he won't be back. He's like, I'm not fucking coming back over here, you know, like I took off from work, I came all the way here, I'm just not re-enlisting. Well, like within a month or so, all those dudes got sent to Korea.
Dang.
Everybody dead.
Yeah.
Like every person that he was in with, all dead. And he wasn't my blood grandfather, but he's the guy that, you know, I know as my grandfather. So, you know, had he passed away, like I'd still be here. But that's a crazy story, man.
It is.
Like,
yeah, I mean, shout out to Marines and all veterans throughout. But I think when I'm looking back on Marine Corps history, I think the two toughest eras and the two worst places to be would have been the Marines island hopping through, taking the islands back from Japan in World War II, and then the Marines that were fighting in Korea during the Korean War, especially at the Chosin Reservoir. Like when you read about that, it's unbelievable how tough those dudes were and what a legacy they laid to us, to live up to, and it's just true heroes.
I had I want to say 4 or 5 uncles that all went into the Marine Corps, and then we're talking like Vietnam era. And my dad, when it was his turn to go, he went to the Navy because he was like, he heard all their stories about how they're in the jungle and like, there's some cool stories of like learning how to fight, but he's like, I don't want to be in the jungle, and he was on an aircraft carrier and ended up touring around like Europe and spent a lot of time in like Portugal and Spain and never saw any action at all. Like they had one a Russian sub come up on them one time that was like a all hands on deck type of situation. But he had like a pretty easy job where he managed the top secret records on the ship. And so he's sitting in an air conditioned office every day.
Yeah, that's the move. Hey, boys and girls, if you want to join the military and see the world, Navy's a good way to do it. And we spent a lot of, because the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy. Our checks still say Navy on them. And so, we're right on those ships all the time. And it's a good way to see the world.
I had a friend that was in the Navy, and one of like the coolest, he was kind of like he wasn't the smartest guy. He was like, he could have gotten into the Air Force, and they told him this is a time they were like, no more tattoos before you go. And this guy goes and gets another tattoo. And then they refused to allow him to come in. So he has to join the Navy, but he joins as like a seaman's apprentice or what. He's like worst job, he's like scrubbing barnacles on the side of ships and stuff. But when he finally got a good position, he was working on the hovercraft crew. Yeah. And they were stationed in San Diego. And so for 3 months out of the year, they would spend in Hawaii as well. And they were like doing training in between San Diego. And so this moron of a guy like got the best job you could possibly have, like he's on the beach, like he has an entire week off every single month, But yeah, I attempted to join military in 99. I did like the Army, and I took the ASVAB. And whenever they were asking me to go do the physical, I was like, well, how long will it be after that before I go? And they're like, oh man, the next day we got a group going. We want you to go with them. And okay, let me think about it, And I remember calling that recruiter back, man, and he was so pissed at me. You would think I just like did the worst thing in the world, like ran over his dog or something. Right. And all my family, my grandfather was in the military, my dad, they all were so disappointed in me that I made this decision. They're like, why would you not go into the military? It's a great opportunity. And I think it would have been for sure. I have some regret of not doing it, but I think that I felt a lot of pressure from them, and so that's why I decided not to do it. Yeah. And it definitely my life was not easy. I don't think it would have been easy either way. But then you're like, I have no college degree or anything. I'm working minimum wage jobs. Fortunately, I was intelligent enough to teach myself a lot of things, but I feel like most people are not in that opportunity. They're not able to do that. When did you start training jiu-jitsu? What year was that?
So I trained a little bit in '99 before I went off to boot camp, just for a couple months. It was I think it was the first MMA place in Dallas. I want to say it was called Fighter's House. It was in Farmers Branch. But that, we were talking earlier about, in 2000, it's so hard to find a jiu-jitsu black belt. Yeah. So the guy that taught at that school was a purple belt. And so it just kind of shows the difference in time. The head instructor could be a purple belt back then because there was so fewer. So trained for a couple months there, and then did the Marine Corps martial arts stuff while I was in the Marines, and then not again until we met.
Yeah. That was
14 maybe?
Yeah, 13, 14, somewhere in there. When I started training, the guy that was teaching grappling was a black belt in karate. He had some MMA fights, and he was a black belt under Chuck Norris, so he had done grappling. And he was a super legit guy, but I rolled with him again when I was a purple belt. and he was a purple belt, and I just like completely destroyed the guy.
Yeah.
But I can remember when I first got a real grappling coach, the guy was like a 3-stripe blue belt.
Yeah.
And the guy would just wreck everybody
Absolutely.
in the room. And he had done some Jeet Kune Do. He was like a black belt under Dan and Asanto. So he had some understanding of grappling, but I think once he got his blue belt, he was like, really dialed in on jiu-jitsu. And I can remember like one day talking to him like, man, like there's nothing I can do to you. Like, he goes, but eventually like everybody in here will be a black belt. If they keep training, everybody will be a black belt. And then at that point, we'll either be submitting each other or not able to submit each other. Hang on one second. All right, guys, so we had to take a break. We had somebody come in. That's the problem with sometimes filming in these places that like aren't a real studio, right? But cool guy. We got to meet one of the local business owners here. That's the thing about jiu-jitsu, like you never know who's going to like walk in your door. I've met some really cool people. Obviously like you're not one of them, but
that goes without saying.
Yeah. But, let's talk about that. Like you were my first adult student.
Yeah.
And, I was in a, Kung Fu studio,
right.
and it was an interesting place. It's like I don't know how to describe it. It's like a concrete floor place where they had some mats that rolled out, and they were like held together with like metal weights on the edges. Yeah. And you would come in after your job. You were like, I don't remember what you were doing at that time, but it was late. It was like 9 o'clock or something. There would be an hour between teaching my last class and when you would show up.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you because I needed the money, but at the same time, like it was. You're getting like one-on-one training with me, and I wasn't a black belt, but I was a purple belt. Both definitely have like changed quite a bit. I feel like I've put on like more muscle since then, and you've definitely like leaned up quite a bit too. So
when we met, you've always been way better at me at jiu-jitsu. But when we met, I had about a 60-pound advantage on you because you were a super skinny blue belt.
Yeah.
And I was an enormous white belt. And I think I've lost 30 pounds and you've gained 30 pounds. So it's less fair now because you still got way better, but now we're the same size.
Yeah, I might have been like 185 or 190,
and I was 255-ish.
Honestly, the reason I had lost so much weight, so when I started jiu-jitsu, I was like 230, 225. And I got down to like, probably 200 or so, and I felt pretty good. And then I like went through a divorce and, losing a job, and like the stress of that caused me to lose so much weight. And it was one of those points where I didn't realize how much weight I had lost until I showed up to train in a gym one time, and I like went to put my gi on, and it like didn't look right. I was like Dallas Buyers Club or something, So I definitely like started eating better and working out, and I think that that is, I feel a lot better now than I did then, and maybe I didn't even realize like how bad I felt then, but like being strong is definitely an advantage in jiu-jitsu.
100%.
I was telling somebody today, they were like, man, people always tell me I'm strong. Like, strong is a technique too, because you have to train to get that strong. It's not, some people naturally have it, but like I feel like those people that are naturally strong are always going to be out-strengthed by somebody that's actually training it. It'd be like somebody that has natural ability in jiu-jitsu is always going to be beat by a guy that's like more dedicated to training.
It's like the old quote, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah. And some people don't even understand what that means. They're like, yeah, I'm talented. I work hard. It's like, no, man, you got to work harder than what you're thinking you're working.
That's right.
And that happens every day. Like it doesn't ever get any easier, I feel like, but you get better. Yeah, I mean, so you started training with me then. You were a white belt, and then you got your blue belt, right? And then,
I got my blue belt the same day you got your black belt.
Okay, so that was
November 2018. I think
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And then you got your purple belt last year. Is that what it was?
It was either last year or the
year before. Yeah. And I feel like when people get to the purple belt, that's one of those like you're for sure going to make it to black belt. Things happen, where you're not able to train as often or something. But like, I don't know too many people that have made it to purple belt and then just quit. There's always those guys. I've known them at every belt. But if I had to average them all together, I would say like, if we're taking 10 people, maybe like 1 to 3 of those people quit and don't continue. And I feel like maybe they just don't continue for that time,
Right.
but they'll come back eventually, And I've seen that a lot here at the new gym in Plano, of where we're getting guys that were like, well, I used to train at this place in downtown, or I used to train at this place in another city, and I haven't trained 2 or 3 years, but I'm a blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, looking to get back into it. I feel like most of the time once guys make black belt, they've like just committed to the fact that they're going to train
until they die.
Yeah. And whether that means like you go in and you just kind of like get beat up sometimes, like that's what it is, right? You understand that process of like, you're not always going to be the best person.
That's right.
That's kind of where I'm at right now, of like, I'm not old, but I'm like older than most people, and it's kind of like I don't win every single round. In fact, Dom and I went to another gym recently, and I only had 3 hours of sleep and then had to drive 5 hours to be there. But I felt like shit, and it was just like all I did was be defensive, and I feel like a long time ago I would get frustrated and like, man, I didn't win any rounds, but now I'm like, hey, the guy didn't tap me 10 times,
Right.
or like the guy didn't get this move or whatever it may be. Like there's little wins, and that's how mentally I stay involved in training, where some people like get burnt out. I tend to not believe that burnout is a real thing. And mainly it's like because people don't have goals, whether that's like a goal, a long-term goal, or short-term of like I was just saying, don't get tapped or tap this guy that way or whatever. But when I hear people, they're like just showing up and they don't have that passion, they don't have that drive for it. I kind of felt that way when I got my black belt, that I was super motivated to get the black belt. And then when I got it, I felt like no different.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know what I expected, but I think I expected like, some kind of like raise to shoot down and like feel this kind of like amazing feeling. And I felt like I had done the work to deserve it, but I also felt like I didn't know anything, and like I didn't know enough to have a black belt.
Right. Felt unworthy.
And I don't feel like I feel that way, but I still feel like I don't know anything. But because of that, I think I learn way more because I'm more motivated, because I realize how little I know.
Right.
And when I talk to some guy sometimes, or man or woman, kid, doesn't matter, and I'm like, hey, do this or that. I know. I'm like, all right, man, I know, but just go ahead and do it, and I think sometimes people are like, they don't have that mindset of like, I know nothing. They have that mindset of I know everything.
Right.
And what I don't know is much smaller than what I do know.
Right.
It's just the opposite.
Yeah, 100%. It makes me think of what you said, makes me think of a few things. One of my favorite definitions for discipline is putting what you want most ahead of what you want now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key in jiu-jitsu. Like I know you got your black belt, and it was like, okay, I got my black belt. I personally, no knock on medical doctors, I know it's a lot, but like I personally hold someone with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in higher esteem than I do someone with a medical doctorate. Because on average, it's going to take about the same amount of time. Mm-hmm. But I know a doctor has to put in long hours, and it's not easy. I'm not knocking it. But I also believe that it shows a lot more discipline getting a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, because these things aren't just handed out.
Yeah.
And I know the pain, I know the inconvenience. There's just so many things you got to go through to get to there that it's very impressive to me. So just keeping that in mind, putting what you want most ahead of what you want now, because it's so easy to get off work and just be like, not today. And I just want to go home and relax, and then not today turns into not this week, mm-hmm. turns into not this month, and then 40 years later, you're like, yo, I should have done that. I think about it all the time. I'm sure you do. Like, why was I such an idiot in high school? Why didn't I just find a jiu-jitsu gym and start training them? Why didn't I start working out back then? Yeah. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Well, I can't do anything about that, but mm-hmm. I can do something about today and tomorrow,
right. Yeah, whenever I started, or I signed up for my first jiu-jitsu class, I was like 20 or 21, and I had a family member at the time that I worked for that convinced me not to do it because of like potential injury. Like looking back on it, I was, very influential by this person, and they kind of took advantage of that in many ways. But this is another one of those instances where like I shouldn't have listened to him, but it took me, I think I was like 28 or something, like 27 when I finally did my class. And since then I don't think I've ever stopped training, And it's I couldn't imagine not doing it. You know, like obviously, like I said, I'm not like as skilled or fast or strong, but I still I do it all the time. You know, and the great thing about it is like you can do this with like limited risk of injury if you understand, you know, proper body movement and function and stuff. You know, and yeah, I mean, have you had like many friends that have like trained? You know, I know you got one guy, Lee, that like trains with us, but like, how many friends have you tried to convince to train, and they just kind of like, nah, I'm not doing that?
I would say virtually everyone that I suggest this to does not take me up on the suggestion for one reason or another. And then I think the other thing too, I think maybe it splits into two groups. Those that finally do decide to go and train, and they get just crushed, and they're in uncomfortable positions, uncomfortable in a variety of ways, whether you're in north-south for the first time and it's weird, or you're mashed under some heavyweight and side control and it sucks. I think some of the people that finally train are like, I can't imagine doing this for years and years and years. It's so miserable today. And another group going through the same thing is like, I'm going to keep training this till this doesn't happen to me anymore.
Yeah.
I think some people get freaked out by it, and some people get intrigued by the challenge and are like upset that another dude can do this to them. Because until you walk in here, you don't think what's going to happen is going to happen. Like, you know, you've been in 6 fights in high school. You won 5, you lost 1. All right, that dude out-knuckled me a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's not the same experience as getting on a mat and having some savage just do whatever he wants to you and just being helpless.
But at the same time, they're like having a conversation with somebody else, you know, like they're beating your ass.
Yes.
And then they're like coaching the person beside you.
And they're talking about what they're going to make for dinner later. And it's just, so like, I think some people see that and just build up like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. It'll take too long to get good, or this is all a hoax or whatever it is. But other people, like, even though they go through the same uncomfortable humiliation, are like, look, I don't want that to be me anymore. I'm going to keep at this until that's not me, so I can get on this mat and hold my own, or like you said, even just survive. You know?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people that don't ever try it. You know, I mean, obviously, it is a very like a niche thing. I've invited a lot of people. I don't think I've ever had one friend that has like done a class. And at this point, I don't really have any friends that aren't
here.
You know, like all my friends that like would have done this, of like, I just cut them out because it's like, if you won't do something difficult, I feel like I don't have anything in common with you. You know, I've invited like family members and stuff. I have a niece that would probably be very interested if they like live closer. I love to like go there on holidays or family gatherings and like teach her something and then watch her apply it on everybody. But the first time I ever did that, I taught her how to wrist lock people. And it was like the type of wrist lock where like people are putting their hand on you and she's just like catching the elbow and locking it in. And so she goes up to my brother-in-law's mother. And she's like, Grandma, can I see your hand? You know, she puts it on and like wrist locks the hell out of her. And I have to be like, look, there's certain people you can wrist lock, you know, but grandparents are like not one of those, you know, like
wrist lock the world.
Yeah. I mean, she went for it, you know, but I could definitely see her like being a fighter. She kind of has that spirit, you know. Yeah, it's not for everybody, man. You know, I think it is for everybody, but everybody's not for jiu-jitsu, really, is what it is. You know, it takes a certain type of person. Like we were talking before this about people that do well in this, or people that do like body control sports. You know, that's whether that's like surfing or skydiving or rock climbing or breakdancing. Those type of people do best, and they already have that mentality of like doing something very challenging. So they're more likely to do this, as opposed to one, somebody that has never done anything, right? And then two, somebody that has like done a team sport. You know, yeah, I don't. There is no like set person that I could say like this person is the perfect student. You know, I talked about this at noon today when I was teaching a class of how you never know which person is going to be the one that sticks around to a black belt. You know, because the person that is normally the most athletic or, you know, has the most skill or strength is not always the one that like is in for the long haul. You know, it's like the guy that does get beat and comes back. You know, that's what it really takes, is like somebody that's willing to be the nail for a long time.
That's right.
You know? Yeah. So, you've been training now for how many years?
10, I guess.
Yeah. And recently you guys had some new kids, huh?
Yeah.
Like how long ago was that?
About 1.5 years ago.
So how long do you think it is before, obviously 3, probably they'll start getting into training, maybe 4 or something like that?
I've started them on their boxing, which, I think is an easier thing to pick up because we're always using our hands. So I built them in their own little speed bag and doing that a little bit. I think grappling will start once they can talk.
Yeah.
Because I think it's less intuitive, and I need to say, hey, like you were saying with your niece, like there's some people you can wrist lock, some people can't.
Right.
This is how you apply, because it's not just intuitive to do it like putting your hand out is in boxing. So I think grappling, at whatever point they start actually holding conversations, I think it'll start then.
And you guys are like in an area where they have really good wrestling too, so they could like potentially go to wrestle and then like get scholarships, which I think is something that a lot of people don't understand with wrestling, is that that's a huge market in colleges. It brings in a lot of money, so they're willing to spend a lot of money for students as well.
Yeah, I would definitely like them to pick up wrestling, and it's such a great base. It's like what we were talking about earlier. Like, man, it would have been so cool to start training back then. I didn't have a wrestling program in my school.
Yeah, me either.
And I think maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I still would have been a knucklehead and not done it. But maybe that would have been the thing that got me into it. And what a great base that is. And so I'm hoping they definitely get interested in wrestling, and then obviously keep at jiu-jitsu. And
yeah, I feel like people that wrestled, especially once they go into college, it's like that toughness that they have allows them to do like great things in life.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it's like they're just a manager of a business or a business owner or a dad or whatever it is. Like most people that have gone through that hard wrestling are just, they're tough people, and they have like I don't know what the exact word is, but they're just good people, and that's something that is missed on a lot of times of like people that live a soft life.
That's right.
And I think that's another thing that like kids that do jiu-jitsu, not every kid is for wrestling, and so because of that we have jiu-jitsu, and that allows kids that are maybe like wouldn't be a team star on a sports team or whatever to still kind of get that same mentality. And like I preach that a lot to the kids about how you do this, it's difficult, you apply these same learnings in your life. Like if you can make it through being crushed by somebody and bottom side control for 6 minutes, you can deal with a boss that is like putting deadlines on you that are unrealistic or whatever. Like you have that inner, I guess like the word would be like metal, right? Yeah. So well, do you have anything else you want to share? Any like crazy stories? Any alien stories? We're always looking for people with like
alien stories. No, I don't think I've ever had any alien stories. I mean, I got stories for days. It just just depends on what you want to hear and what piques your interest.
I mean, I'm just looking for something that you want to share. Maybe I don't know. But keep in mind we got people listening too. It's not just you and I here. I don't even know where to start on that. Well, let's say you grew up in Garland, right?
Yep.
And Garland is like for people that don't know, Garland is like one of the rougher areas, I feel like, of Dallas. Maybe
a good intro to Garland, because most people have probably seen Zombieland with Woody Harrelson. That movie starts in Garland, and he's like, you might think this because it's Zombieland, but that's just how Garland looks, and that's a pretty accurate statement.
Yeah, it's a cross between that and like the King of the Hill was supposedly Garland too, right? Yeah, it's Garland is one of those places I feel like it's still real. You know what I mean? Like you can't pull up to somebody and honk at them because they didn't use their blinker or something. Like that guy may get out of his car. I live in Garland as well, and I enjoy it because there's like really authentic food and stuff as well. Like a lot of good Mexican food, a lot of good Asian food, but also, like I said, like there's some real ass people there, like you got to always be strapped, always be ready. I don't live too far from like 635, and whenever I would take my daughter back home and we'd drive through that area, I see this could be you, this isn't you, but like these people here probably riding in their dad's car at some point, thinking like, damn, that could never be me. Like if you make the wrong mistakes in life, this could be you. 100%. And I think like that, that reality check very close to home is like something that I didn't ever see as a kid. I never saw a homeless person, but now like I live in Dallas, like that's a regular deal. And most of these people have mental health issues, but a lot of them are like mental health issues because of drug abuse or something, right?
Yeah, I think, so I grew up in South Garland. For all the local people, I grew up in the neighborhood at Broadway and Oates. And I think it greatly contributed to me being a knucklehead in high school, because who I looked up to wasn't, the captain of the football team or the baseball team. I didn't give a rip about that. I looked up to whoever the toughest guy was in the neighborhood, or the toughest guy. Who's the toughest guy in school? And again, this was pre-UFC, so there's still a lot of mythology like behind it. Like I remember thinking growing up, and everyone I knew thought the same way, that fighting was just a skill you were given. Because the common question was, could that dude fight? And it was like whether you're given an attribute, like an X-Men or something, is like, did you get gifted with this fighting attribute? Because no one was training, right? Like there was no one doing anything. It was just dudes knuckling up in the streets, and some dudes could fight, some dudes couldn't. So you're always wondering, like, did this guy get blessed with more fighting ability than this guy? And we didn't start thinking about endurance and experience and all this other stuff. So it was like, that was my local heroes, which whoever dude was the best fighter in the neighborhood, the best fighter in school. Oh, could that best fighter at that school beat this one, and why? It was kind of the talk. And so that's what I was always drawn toward, was these dudes who could knuckle up.
Yeah. I remember there were a couple brothers that were at my local school that were Samoan guys, and they were friends of mine. They were like 4 brothers and 1 sister, and the sister was the biggest out of all of them. And but these guys would like fight, and then like if somebody else would jump in, like one of the other brothers would fight that person, And I can remember like one fight in particular. This guy they were fighting was like, he was always in and out of like juvenile detention, and I don't know why they were fighting, but I remember coming out of the gym, and here they are, there's like a group of people, and the guy that was always in juvie had a cast on, and he was using it like a shield, to like block these punches, and it hit the guy, and it was a crazy fight, Like I think growing up, I don't know if it's like that everywhere, but like definitely growing up in Texas, there was a lot of fights at school. Like I would fight, and then the thing that would happen to you is you could either get licks or you do like in-school suspension,
right.
And I had the licks once or twice, but man, once they got me good, I was like, I'll take a week of in-school suspension, because you're just sitting at a cubicle all day,
right.
And they bring your lunch to you.
Right.
It's like, how bad is that? It's like, it's setting you up to work a real job, actually,
Yeah, you were talking earlier about wrestling being such a good base, and what it makes you out to be. And my right and left-hand men in the Marine Corps, they were wrestlers in high school, the 2 toughest dudes I've ever known in my life. And we're doing cold weather training out in Bridgeport, which I think, and most anyone that did it would agree, that's the toughest training in the Marine Corps, is when you go through cold weather training. And I think in no small part because most of the Marine Corps is poor guys from the South. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't grow up going skiing, and we're not from the North. Yeah. And so like, not only is the training hard, but you got a whole bunch of dudes that aren't used to that environment. Yeah. So anyway, one time we got blizzarded in, and to pass time, the younger guys were asking, hey, could y'all tell us some stories? So I would tell a South Garland fight story, and then one of them would tell one of theirs. So one of them's from Portland, one of them grew up on the reservation in North Dakota.
Okay.
And so, which obviously is the toughest environment in North America. Mm-hmm. And so he would tell one of his res stories, and then we'd say, all right, one of y'all tell it. And then they didn't have any stories, and we're like, well, okay, think about it, we'll come back. And the 3 of us realized, like, we thought like everyone grew up like us, but like it's not so much. And so just the 3 of us kept telling story after story after story, and all these other like deer in the headlights. So yeah, I think there's something to that.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we definitely have to do it again, man. I feel like it was too short and we got interrupted, but we'll definitely do it one more time for sure. Yeah, always take time off for a new student. Appreciate you guys. Make sure you tune in on all podcast platforms. The video, again, is always on YouTube. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks, guys.
And that's a wrap for today's Kings of Kimuras episode. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey. Remember to keep training, stay curious, and always be ready for the next adventure. Until next time, keep your guards up and your minds open.